It's my pleasure now to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Tim Michael. He will help us explore the importance of physical activity, exercise, and proper nutrition as it relates to physical health and how these factors influence chronic disease. Dr. Michael is in his 29th year as a university professor. He worked at Middle Tennessee State University before joining Western Michigan University in 2000. He is currently a full professor in the Department of Human Performance and Health Education. He's also a certified clinical exercise physiologist and a fellow in the American College of Sports Medicine. His research has been in the area of pediatric exercise and obesity, pediatric cardiovascular risk, perception of exertion, exercise biochemistry, exercise, and sport nutrition. Welcome, Dr. Michael.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad that we finally are seeing some sunshine this morning. I was asked to talk a little bit about physical wellness today. And physical wellness is one of 9 strands of wellness. And physical wellness itself encompasses things like eating well, physical exercise, avoiding harmful habits, safe sex practices, recognizing diseases and their symptoms, getting regular physical checkups with your doctor, and avoiding injuries. So I'm not going to cover all of that today, but I will cover exercise, physical activity, eating healthy, and also weight management. I'm going to share my screen now. Hopefully. Okay, so as I said, my talk today is on physical wellness. And the definition of physical wellness, and this is partly my definition, there's lots of different definitions for this, but we're looking at trying to maintain our optimal body function through healthy food intake, physical activity, exercise, and be able to perform our activities of daily living while maintaining a high quality of life and improving our life expectancy. So we're going to talk a little bit about physical activity and exercise. You might think that they're exactly the same thing. They're a little bit different. Physical activity is a much broader term than exercise itself. So physical activity is any form of muscular activity that we do. So walking from your car to the grocery store parking lot, walking upstairs, mowing your lawn, vacuuming the carpet, whatever you do that makes you move is physical activity. And we know that the amount of physical activity that you participate in or garner in a day does cause you to reduce your risk for death from all causes, not just for cardiovascular disease or stroke or things like that. So from all causes. Physical inactivity is becoming a primary risk factor for coronary heart disease. We tend to not move around as much as we used to. At the turn of the 19th or 20th century, the leading cause of death was infectious diseases. Today in the 21st century, it is cardiovascular disease, which is usually associated with a lack of physical activity and poor eating patterns. Physical fitness is a set of attributes that relate to the ability to perform physical activity. We'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. And exercise itself is a subset of physical activity. It's a planned behavior. You plan to exercise. You're going to go out for your run. You're going to go lift some weights. So it's a planned behavior. Physical activity isn't necessarily a planned behavior. So when we look at the components of health-related physical fitness, we see here that aerobic fitness is what most people think of when they think of fitness. So cardiovascular fitness is also that term. But we also have flexibility in low back and hamstrings. We know that low back injuries and strain has has a pretty large impact on our productivity as a society, a lot of lost days of work due to those kinds of things. That's also associated with poor muscular strength and endurance of our abdominal area. But now we say core instead of abdominals, because it's not just your abdominals, it's your back as well. And then our body composition. So how much lean body mass, so muscle mass to fat do we have? So those four things combined would be our health-related physical fitness. We can impact each one of those areas separately or together, depending on the kind of activities you do. Physical activity that has been centered around health, and we know that lots of different agencies have come out with their ideas of how much exercise we should get to impact our health. The American College of Sports Medicine and Centers for Disease Control recommendation in 1995 was that we should get at least 30 minutes of moderate activity on most days of the week. In 2007, along with the American Heart Association, we made that a little bit more specific, and we suggested that you do at least 30 minutes on 5 days a week and throw in a few vigorous intensity exercises at least a couple to 3 days a week. Also in 2007, we included the recommendation of resistance training, which in the past was not included. We just looked at aerobic fitness training. Now we're looking at resistance training because we know that resistance training also has a fairly large impact on our overall health. In 2008, the United States Surgeon General put out these guidelines. Again, not much different than what we've had in the past. We're looking at about 150 minutes of moderate intensity activity a week. So that, again, that's about 30 minutes a day for 5 days a week, and about 75 minutes of vigorous activity if you can't do the 5 days a week. So we're looking at about 150 to 300 minutes per week is what we're suggesting people should be getting. Now, you don't have to do that all at once. You don't have to do 30 minutes straight. You can break that up and do 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes in the afternoon, 10 minutes in the evening, if that's what works best for you. But the idea is to accumulate a volume of physical activity. So when we look at physical activity, there is an organization now called Exercise is Medicine. And you'll see the terminology on this slide. It says dose response, which sounds a little like taking a medication. You take a certain amount of medication to get a certain response to that. So if you have a headache, you take some medicine for your headache, and if it's the right dose, hopefully your headache goes away. So the goal with physical activity is to get the right dose, so the amount of physical activity, and hopefully your response is such a way that it impacts your health. So we can see that regular participation in physical activity lowers our rate of all-cause mortality, also cardiovascular disease, coronary heart disease. It increases our weight loss and reduced weight regain. It lowers our incidence of obesity and type 2 diabetes, lowers our risks of cancer, including colon and breast cancer, and improves our ability to complete activities of daily living and reduces our risks of falls for older individuals. It reduces depression and cognitive decline, and it increases, or it has favorable changes with the rest of our cardiovascular risk factors. So in fact, exercise or physical activity does act like a medication. So as I said, physical activity and health is geared towards the volume. So how much exercise do you participate in a given week? Again, it doesn't have to be a planned behavior like exercise, but being physically active. We know that the risk of chronic diseases are reduced for about 20 to 40% for those that are physically active. And that if you can do something, it's better than doing nothing at all. So if you can't do the recommendations, but you can do something, it's better to move than not move. Right now, we're actually starting to consider sitting time as a risk factor. So how much time do you sit in a day? Which is really just talking about physical inactivity. but we're still talking about the idea that by sitting, that is impacting your overall health, and it's reaching a risk factor that is comparable to smoking at this point. So it's getting pretty specific. So we want to make sure that we get enough exercise or enough physical activity to overcome any adverse reactions to any inactivity that we do during the day. Looking at fitness, we see that in this diagram, I know it looks a little complicated, but let me just point out a couple things. Right here is the highest fitness level group of people, and this is the lowest fitness level. This comes from the Aerobics Institute in Dallas. 1 means average risks for death. So you can see that the fittest people are at average risk, and the least fit people are almost 4.5 times greater chance of death. So we're looking at, even if you're a cardiovascular disease individual, being fit offers you protection. So we want to make sure that even if you're not healthy, that you are participating in some sort of physical activity program. There's very few chronic diseases that are at risk for exercise. So most you can exercise without much risk at all. Jeremy Morris in 1953 from Great Britain actually did a study looking at the ticker taker and the conductors on double-decker buses. And what he found was the conductors actually had a lower incidence of heart attacks compared to the drivers. Now, if you just think about what I mentioned about sitting, we have our drivers, and they are at the highest risk of having a heart attack. They're twice the risk compared to the conductors. So the conductors all day walk up and down the stairs and up and down the aisles. So they're physically active all day during their shift, while the bus drivers sit behind the steering wheel. So again, we have information from back in 1953 that showed pretty significantly that we have an impact on chronic disease if we are physically active. So this chart shows you sort of the area in which we want to concentrate on as far as volume of exercise. So about 60 to 80% of our maximal ability is where we want to exercise at, about 3 to 4 times a week, and anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes when we do exercise. That's sort of the sweet spot, if you will. We can do more exercise. However, we have to be careful. For some of us, that may be a risky proposition. If we do too much, we look at things like overuse injuries. And if you do have some cardiovascular disease, it could put you at some extra risk for that. However, research lately has shown that even exercising at the higher intensities, the benefits outweigh the risk for most people. So we have a problem, if you will, in the United States, is that in general, overall, we're getting older, not younger. And with that, we have the issue of the elderly becoming less and less active as well. And so along with the age decline that we see in people's physical health, being inactive actually increases the risk as we get older. So we want to make sure that our older individuals, and I include myself in that we need to make sure that we're moving as much as we can, that we're not sitting around, we're not overeating, which I'm going to talk about in a moment, but again, moving around taking the opportunity to be active as much as we can. So as we see, the physical activity for our adult population is pretty low. Only 15% of people engage in a vigorous physical activity 3 times a week. 60% don't engage in any physical activity on a regular basis. 25% basically live a sedentary lifestyle. But we know that we can do lots of different things. Walking is very easy for most people to accomplish. Even leisure time activities like gardening fits into most activities as something that's moderate in intensity. Most yard work in general is moderate intensity. So again, lots of different things. If you like to dance, ballroom dance, square dance, they're all really good activities. And if they're fun, you're more likely to continue doing that kind of activity. So again, we're looking at trying to decrease the amount of inactivity that we see in our population. Now, there are inconsistencies among different parts of the population in which inactivity is a problem. As we can see here, inactivity seems to be lower or higher, in women, Blacks, and Hispanics, older adults, and less affluent persons. Accompanying that is the issue of what we call the built environment. We're having less and less green space and more concrete and asphalt. So there's not a lot of areas outside for people to be physically active, even for our children for that matter. So we do need to think about how we plan our communities now and have enough green space for people to feel safe when they're outdoors being physically active. So our children and our teenagers are not much better. We see that over half or about half of our 12 to 21-year-olds don't exercise vigorously at all or on a regular basis. 14% don't do any physical activity. 25% engage in light to moderate physical activity. And we know that our participation in physical activity tends to decline as we get older and higher in our school grade. This is probably a lot to do with video games and what we call screen time. Most often kids are just sitting in front of a screen somewhere, either their phone or laptop or computer or television set. And I'm at an age where I still remember when you'd go outside, you leave the house in the morning and you run around the neighborhood all day long, and you wouldn't come back until 5 o'clock when it was dinner time. You ate your lunch at your friend's house, wherever you were at the time. We had a fire station that blew their whistle at 5 o'clock every day, so we knew what time to ride home on our bikes or run home. That was our average day as kids when I was growing up. I live in an area in Portage that's between an elementary school and a middle school. And I know there's lots of kids in my neighborhood, and you hardly ever see them. You don't see them out playing. You don't see them riding their bikes. You don't see them playing pickup games of wiffle ball or touch football or anything like that. So what are they doing? If they're not outside playing and participating in some sort of activity, what are they doing? They're sitting, they're eating, they're watching some screen for some reason. So we do have to try to figure out a way to move past that. We do know, and this is historically true, that males are more active than females in our society, and that's something that has changed a little bit over the last 10 years, but there still is a difference. And we also are losing physical education programs in most of our schools. So again, in the early 1990s, about 42% of kids in school participated in the physical education program, and now it's less than 25%. So when we look at physical activity as a whole, as I said, we have activities of daily living at the bottom. So that's what we should be doing the most of. And then as we climb the pyramid, these are the types of activities we should do throughout the week. We definitely want to stay away from the top of the pyramid as much as we can. Okay, so again, not sitting around watching TV or playing games. There's always a concern on whether exercise is safe to do. And you always hear, go see your doctor before starting an exercise program. And that's true for most of us if we have some risk factors. But low to moderate activity usually doesn't require a physician to sign off on. But I always tell people it's always safe to go ahead and start that way first. Go to your doctor and get a clean bill of health and go ahead and start your exercise program. So when we look at whether or not it's risky, some people definitely have a genetic predisposition for problems. Okay, so we need to know that. Have you ever had a history of issues while you're participating in physical activity, feeling kind of faint or chest pain with that? Don't go out there the first time and go as hard as you can. That's probably not a good idea. Work your way up to a higher intensity of exercise. You probably shouldn't exercise if you're under extreme stress, because stress is both exercise stress and the psychological stress. So the two together could be a little bit too much for your body to handle. Don't exercise when it's 95 degrees outside and 85% humidity. Again, you have the environmental stress on top of the exercise stress. So probably, again, not a good idea. Straining when you exercise, this is sort of the idea of, if you've ever lifted weights and you hear people grunt when they're lifting, that's the straining type of exercise they're referring to. So again, if you're an older individual with some cardiovascular risk, that type of straining actually can be rather dangerous. We see that a lot in the winter time when people are shoveling snow. And then there's exercise while you have an active infection. Again, you need to get rest and make sure you can take care of your infection first and then deal with exercise later. And then this day and age, lots of people are on prescription drugs and some are taking dietary supplements that do not mix well. And then when you add exercise with that, it can put too much stress on the system as well as some of the other things we talked about. So with that saying, it sounds like exercise is pretty not so safe for a lot of people, but it is actually. When we look at the risk of exercise, it's about 1 in 10,000 chance that something catastrophic will happen to you when you exercise. So it's relatively safe for most people to participate in an exercise program. So looking here, we see the idea of, if you are physically active, does that give you some sort of protection as far as heart attacks? And so we see that people that don't exercise at all have the highest risk compared to those that exercise about 5 days a week. So again, we see that the more active you are, the better. In clinical exercise physiology, we talk about primary and secondary prevention. Primary prevention is trying to stop you from having your first heart attack. And the secondary prevention is trying to stop you from having a second heart attack. So we know that people that are relatively fit generally we don't see them having heart attacks as much as the unfit population. And those that are fit tend to be the ones that survive a heart attack. So again, being physically active and fit gives you some protection. So sedentary environmental death syndrome sounds kind of ominous, but really what it is just saying that we have a very inactive society, and being that inactive costs us a lot in healthcare. As you see, $2 to $3 trillion of healthcare expenses are attributed to people being inactive and the chronic diseases associated with that. We see that in our children today. They are starting to have adult health problems like hypertension and type 2 diabetes, which we used to call adult onset diabetes. So again, this idea of sitting around doing nothing has caught up to us. And we do everything we can in our society to avoid physical activity. I work at the Student Rec Center at Western Michigan University, and it just amazes me that people on the second floor where you can work out leave the second floor and get on the elevator to go to the third floor to walk out the building. I don't understand that philosophy. You just worked out. You can't walk up a flight of stairs to walk out of the building. But that's what we do. We avoid it. I still remember having to get up out of the chair and turn a dial on the TV. And most people don't know how to turn on their TV without the remote control today. So again, we try to do everything we can to eliminate activity. When we look at people getting older, one of the biggest problems we have is muscle loss. As we get older, there's a natural ability to lose muscle, which is called sarcopenia. And we see that in this graphic here, where we have the loss of muscle mass throughout our aging years. Is that inevitable? Yes. I mean, you can't stop it completely, but you can slow it down. And you can slow it down again by being physically active. When we lose muscle, we lose strength. If we lose strength, it's hard to maintain our balance. If we can't maintain our balance, we're more apt to fall. If we fall, we're more apt to break something like our hip. So again, maintaining muscle mass, our strength is important. Here's a graphic, an MRI that shows 2 slides of a thigh muscle of a 92-year-old male. This is before they started exercising, lifting weights, and this is after. And you can see that they've gained quite a bit of muscle mass here compared to here. At 92 years old, 92, it's never too late. It's never too late to start an exercise program. If we think about cognitive decline with aging, we know that there are things that affect that overall. We see that physical activity decreases inflammatory markers, enhances your neural connections. It reduces obesity. It reduces vascular risk, which means blocking of arteries, both in your heart and in your brain. All that together leads to a reduced cognitive decline and dementia as we get older. So again, being physically active has many benefits, and one of them is our cognitive health as well. So is physiological loss with aging, is it lifestyle or chronologic age? And the answer is it's both. You can't stop from growing old, as much as we would like to sometimes, but we can slow that down. We can change the rate at which we get older. I'm going to call out my father-in-law on this one. He's 90 years old, and he was very active for most of his life. And one time he said to me, I can't scamper over my boulders anymore when I'm hiking in the mountains. And I'm like, well, you are older, I says, but you're doing more activity as an 85-year-old than anybody who's 70 years old. So he has increased his longevity probably 12 to 15 years by being physically active. So we can't stop from growing old, but we can slow the rate at which we grow old by being physically active. So here we see the classic view. It's all downhill, right? We get old, it's all downhill. What we see now is that we can stop the downhill decline, and we can try to maintain our health by being more physically active. Again, eventually it's going to catch up to us getting old, but we can maintain our health for quite a long time by being physically active. I'm going to point out this Harvard Alumni study. And Harvard Alumni study has shown that, again, being physically active counters the effect of things like cigarette smoking or exercise or excess weight. It reduces hypertension and death from hypertension. The other thing the Harvard study came out with is that it's not a lifetime protection. You can't be physically active as a college student and then after you graduate, don't do anything anymore. It only matters what you're doing today. If you're physically active today, then that's going to offer you some protection. But it's not going to give you a lifetime of protection because you were active as a kid or a young adult. It's only if you're active currently. So most of the epidemiological studies have suggested that, again, there's strong association with physical activity and decreasing our risks for various chronic diseases. And again, emphasizing that a sedentary person doubles their risk of developing heart disease than an active person. Also, we have the issue of the idea of if we're physically active, that in some cases that reduces our needs for medications. So again, if you are more active and you are taking medicine for early onset diabetes or hypertension, you may be able to either back off on those medications with, of course, working with your doctor, or going off those medications altogether, depending. So again, I'm not one who likes to take pills. And so if it's possible, then I think that's a good thing. Postmenopausal women tend to start out tracking men as far as their cardiovascular risk. And so we do see that for those individuals that they can decrease their risk as well by being more active, as we can see here. All right, so changing course a little bit, healthy eating and weight status. Unfortunately, this is probably going to be sad for a lot of people, but let's look at what we're supposed to eat. So this is generally what we're supposed to eat in these ranges. I know low carb diets are a big thing today, but carbs are important, but we want complex carbohydrates, not simple carbohydrates. So no candy, cakes, and cookies. We want, whole grains and things like that. Fat's still important. We need some fat in our diet, and of course, protein. So when we look at our nutrition labels, I grew up where we just had, the daily value, or not the daily value, but the RDA on the box, and that was it. But now they have all this extra information that's required by law to be on the container. And the daily value is based on a 2,000 calorie a day diet. So when you eat one serving of this macaroni and cheese, you're getting 11% of your daily amount of fat in that one serving of macaroni and cheese. 18% or 16%, can't read it quite, of sodium. So we need to learn how to read these nutrition facts. Here's 6 grams of sugar. That's added sugar. Do they need to add that sugar to that macaroni and cheese? Probably not. As it points out, there's no value to that by adding sugar to it. So we need to understand, again, what those packages are telling us. And what is a portion size? Well, portions have changed quite a bit over the years. Years ago, 30, 40 years ago, we have what's popcorn you used to get at the movie theaters. And this is what people choose today. This was a hamburger years ago, and that's what it is today. I remember these little bottles of Coca-Cola back in the day. Now that's the regular size bottle. When we look at serving sizes, the can of Coca-Cola, which is 355 milliliters, probably around 200 calories or so. It used to say one serving on the can. I'm sorry, it used to say 2 servings on the can. Whoever drank a half a can of soda? Eventually they had to change that to 1 serving because that's what people did. They drank the whole can. They didn't separate it into 2 servings. So we have this portion problem in the United States. People like large portions. Again, dietary guidelines require us to follow a healthy eating pattern over our lifespan, which is, varieties of foods, nutrient dense foods, limit the amount of added sugars and sodium to our diet, choosing healthier food and beverages that are low in sugar. These are things that we should be doing, but we don't. We should be taking in abundant fruits and vegetables, and I'll admit that I'm not good at that, and my wife will agree. Whole grains. Try to get in some good proteins like seafood, soy products. Limit our solid fats. So things that are fat that are solid at room temperature usually have a lot of saturated fat. So go with vegetable type oils like olive oil, safflower oil. When we look at the different types of diet recommendations from the American Diabetes Association, American Heart Association, American Cancer Society, they all pretty much say the same thing, which is increase our fiber, increase our plant food, so fruits and vegetables, decrease our saturated fats, limit our alcohol intake, and get plenty of physical activity. So when we look at what we eat and relate that to our weight, we have an obesity problem in the United States, and obesity causes is associated with a lot of chronic diseases, and it's a problem for us as far as not only our health care but also our productivity as a society. You can see here that 69% of our adults are overweight, and of that, almost 36% are obese. So again, we have a weight problem in the United States. And the question is, how are we going to deal with that? Another concern besides just weight is where we put our weight, so the distribution of weight. So we look at our waist circumference and relate that to our hip circumference, and that's another added risk. So again, do we have a lot of weight around our hips, around our waist? That's added risk on top of the weight itself. So what's the causes of obesity? There are many. How we eat, not sleeping enough, certain medications that we take, other health conditions, not being physically active, and then family factors, so biology and our cultures. Some cultures like to eat, some cultures don't. So I can tell you from my experience working with children and obesity in the Mariana Islands, culture plays a big part. They have lots of festivals and get-togethers in that society, and we figured out that out of 365 days a year, 180 days they have some sort of party. And when they party, lots of food. We know, again, activity plays a role in our ability to carry weight. So those that get 10,000 more steps a day typically maintain a normal body weight. Those that get less than 6,000 steps a day tend to be in the overweight category, approaching obesity. So what do successful losers of weight do? How is it that they can lose the weight and keep it off? Well, they exercise, they limit high fat and sugar in their diet, they limit the total amount of food they consume, they count their calories. So they do a lot of things that we know we can do, and we know that that's what works, but most people don't stick with it long enough to garner the benefits of that. They limit television watching. They eat a low calorie, low fat diet. They're consistent in their diet. They eat breakfast on a daily basis. They self-monitor. Again, these are what makes for a successful weight loss and weight maintenance program. Obesity is affecting our children, as I said. Again, in my work at the Mariana Islands, we were working with trying to prevent obesity in children in the Mariana Islands. And again, we did a survey and we found the most popular food in the Mariana Islands was Spam, which isn't the greatest food in the world. And the favorite drink was something called King Hawaiian, which is like high C, which is basically drinking sugar water. And as I said, they have a lot of festival days and parties and stuff like that. So again, in our society here, obesity's almost tripled over the last 30 years in our kids. And as I said, our kids are getting adult chronic illnesses now. And they carry that into adulthood. When we look at the calories that a typical US person consumes, we're looking at 2,600 calories. Remember, on the side of that box, when we talked about reading box labels, it was based on a 2,000 calorie a day diet. So this is what people are actually eating. If you look down here, you see what people are eating. This is where they should be. My plate recommendations: not getting enough vegetables, not getting enough fruit, not getting enough dairy, but we're eating lots of carbohydrates and lots of meat. Not good. That's the problem. Portion control on what we choose to eat. So is obesity or carrying extra body fat, can you help it? Well, yeah, you can. I mean, there's a lot we don't know as to how you gain body weight. 25% is genetic, but that doesn't mean because you have a genetic predisposition that you're destined to be overweight. It just puts you in a position where you're more predisposed to becoming that, but you're not necessarily going to wind up overweight or obese. So you're just predisposed by your genetics. And then there's the cultural transmission. We tend to eat the way we were raised. If you were raised in a family where people ate a lot of junk food and ate a lot of processed meals, processed food, you'll tend to carry that on into your own meal planning as you get older. So how you were raised, if you will play a role. So again, we're back to the idea that physical inactivity plays a big role besides our eating plan. And we know that if we are eating poorly and also being physically inactive, that's sort of the double whammy, and we're destined to start gaining weight. So again, just to remind you, carrying excess body fat leads to a lot of different chronic problems as we deal with that extra weight. And that's going to impact our healthcare and our longevity and our quality of life. So that distribution of our body fat, as I mentioned earlier, are we putting it on our hips? Or are we putting it on our belly? So the belly type obesity is here, and on your hips is here. So again, this is sort of the apple, and this is the the pear-shaped type obesity. Both have their problems. The central or android type obesity seems to have more of a issue as far as a risk factor than the gynoid type, but the gynoid type obesity also has some problems. So when we combine your BMI versus your waist, here's our worst case scenario. You're overweight and you're putting it all around your belly. So the belly fat is becoming your risk factor as well. So that's the worst case scenario. As we get older, we also know that we're losing that muscle mass, and by losing muscle mass, we are losing the part of our body that burns the most calories. So again, losing that muscle actually encourages you to gain weight, but bad weight, fat weight. If you go on diets where you're just cutting your calories and you're not being physically active or exercising along with that, you will lose weight, but it's going to be harder to maintain that weight loss because you're losing muscle mass as well. So we want to make sure that when we do decide to lose weight to a healthy level, that we do that in combination with exercise and diet. So here you have diet only, okay? And here's our fat-free mass, or our muscle mass in orange, and here's our fat mass. So we're losing weight, we're losing fat mass, we're losing fat-free mass. Again, that's our muscle. But if we diet and exercise, look, we gain muscle, which means we're going to burn calories. So if you had to choose between diet and exercise, diet and exercise is the way to go. That's the best plan for you. So again, this is just a list of the benefits of adding exercise to a dietary restriction plan. And again, as I said, the best plan is to have both in maintaining your weight and maintaining your physical activity so that you can maintain your overall health, well-being, increase your longevity and quality of life. So move, eat, and be healthy.